Tonight, Gaza hospital raid. Israeli forces descend on what is said to be the Hamas terror network's headquarters in Gaza's largest hospital.
We are facing a severe shortage of medical supplies, ventilators, and essential life-saving medicines.
On the verge of running out of critical supplies. Plus, Global Power Summit, the president's high-stakes meeting with China's Xi Jinping, and threats to the homeland.
The ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Targeting Hamas inside a hospital. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening from Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, after infiltrating Gaza's largest hospital, Israel says it has found weapons searching what it believes to be a Hamas headquarters.
The ongoing raid is part of what Israeli officials call a precise and targeted operation. Israel Defense Forces scouring rooms and conducting interrogations at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital in search of the heart of Hamas operations. Israeli forces released this video of ground troops operating near the hospital, where thousands of Palestinians are thought to be sheltering inside, according to Hamas. The terror group releasing these images said to be from inside the hospital during the raid. The hospital takeover comes as some 240 hostages are still held captive by Hamas.
We do have information that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad uses some hospitals in the Gaza Strip, including the Al-Shifa hospital, as a way to conceal and support their military operations and hold hostages. They have tunnels underneath these hospitals.
All this as Israel keeps up an air campaign against Hamas. First responders recovering an injured baby and bodies from the rubble in the aftermath of an air attack in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Well, churches, schools, hospitals, Hamas uses all of these as cover for its operations.
And since the war began, Israel has claimed the location of the terrorists' main base is located under Gaza's largest hospital, where they say hundreds of terrorists have been hiding behind human shields.
George Thomas reports from southern Israel.
Dr. Nasser Bulbal, head of the NICU at Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital, says they are on the verge of running out of critical supplies to keep some of their most vulnerable patients alive.
We do not know what to do, as we are facing a severe shortage of medical supplies, ventilators, and essential life-saving medicines.
While Gazans continue to face severe shortages deep beneath Al-Shifa hospital, Israel says Hamas has stored up ample food, water, fuel, and other critical supplies, including weapons, to carry out its war against the Jewish state.
Hamas terrorists operate inside and under Shifa hospital and other hospitals in Gaza with network of terror tunnels.
The IDF releasing this animated video claiming that the terror group operates its command and control headquarters from several underground complexes beneath Al-Shifa.
Hamas also has an entrance to those terror tunnels from inside the hospital wards, meaning from different places of the hospital, you can go into an underground tunnel that will provide you shelter.
The Islamist militant group which controls the Gaza Strip has been using human shields in conflicts with Israel since 2007.
I know what it feels like to be used as a human shield. Back in 2014, during Israel's war with Hamas, I was in Gaza City, and almost every night I could see Hamas fighters assemble, then fire off their rockets from the basement of my hotel. Hamas knew without a shadow of a doubt that the Israelis would not target the hotel because it was filled with foreign journalists.
A captured Hamas fighter who infiltrated Israel on October 7th, telling interrogators that the terror group uses hospitals like Al-Shifa to hide their fighters and weapons because such places are often teeming with civilians.
I told you, Shifa is a safe place. It will not be struck. To them, it is safe. And that is what we know.
And it's just not hospitals. Hamas often uses structures closest to schools, mosques, and even churches, from which they can hide weapons, fighters, and launch rockets. On October 20th, a prominent Greek Orthodox church in Gaza City sustained heavy damage when Israel hit the headquarters of a Hamas commander. The IDF releasing this video of the strike to CBN News, telling us that the terrorist's home was 50 meters from the church. The ensuing explosion destroying a part of the church and reportedly killing 18 Palestinian Christians.
Hamas not only endangers the lives of Israelis, civilians, but also exploit innocent Gazan civilians as human shield. The IDF will continue making efforts to minimize harm to civilians' population and will continue to act in accordance with international law.
George Thomas, CBN News, along the Israel-Gaza border.
Thank you, George. Here in the nation's capital, nearly 300,000 people flooded the National Mall to show support for Israel. The Tuesday rally coming in response to weeks of pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests around the world. The cause, uniting people on both sides of the political aisle.
There are few issues in Washington that could so easily bring together leaders of both parties in both chambers. But the survival of the state of Israel and her people unites us together.
Congress will continue to support in a bipartisan way the state of Israel and Israel's unequivocal right to exist.
And with us now is Jordana McMillan. She is the U.S. Director at the Israel Allies Foundation. Jordana, welcome to you. First off, if we can get your reaction to the massive turnout that we saw yesterday, did you have any idea that the crowds would grow to the size that they did on the National Mall?
Hi. No, we had no idea. It was absolutely amazing. And it just felt like one big family. And it very much actually felt like a family reunion. You could see people kind of like, oh, hey, catching up with each other and probably hadn't seen each other in a while. It was Jews and Christians together. And it was an amazing thing to be a part of.
Yeah, stretching for as far as the eye could see. It was incredible, the images coming out of the National Mall. Jordana, talk a little bit about the wide-ranging support. People really of all walks of life, Republicans and Democrats alike.
Yes, it was beautiful to see. We had both, you know, you just played some clips there from the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader, and then over on the Senate side as well. And I think it was really well summed up when the Speaker of the House said they watched a video on some of the Hamas, you know, carnage that happened, and a video that they had released. And he said Democrats and Republicans sat weeping watching this. And I think, you know, it's just really brought everyone together, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
Some indelible images yesterday of people draped in both the Israeli flag, the U.S. flag. But one thing that will forever stand out in my mind is something that I would never thought I would have seen, which is Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa and Senator Chuck Schumer holding hands in their solidarity for Israel. We understand your organization also held an event on Capitol Hill last night with members of Congress and hostages' families. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, we had 10, almost a dozen members of Congress there from both sides of the aisle. It was pretty much split 50-50 Democrat and Republican, and it was hosted by the bipartisan Congressional Israel Allies Caucus that we work with on the Hill. And there were families, they currently have family members being held hostage in Gaza, and we felt it was very important for the congressmen to hear, you know, firsthand information about what's going on there. But in reverse, we felt it was very important for our Israeli guests to hear. We also had the Israel's UN ambassador, Gilad Erdan, with us, and we wanted our Israeli friends to hear that we were standing with them as well. And the congressmen really, you know, they spoke for themselves when they said that we are unequivocally behind you and that we will not support a ceasefire, and they were very clear about it.
So, Jordana, what happens next? Where does all of this pro-Israel momentum go from here? What's next for the movement?
So right now, especially within the Christian world, the network American Christian Leaders for Israel and many Christian organizations within that, we have partnered together with synagogues and rabbinic associations, and we are calling for a weekend of prayer this coming weekend. So we want our Jewish friends to know that as they pray in the synagogues for Israel on Friday and Saturday, that on Sunday, that we will be standing with them in prayer and praying for Israel as well.
All right, Jordana McMillan with the Israel Allies Foundation. Jordana, thank you very much for coming on this evening.
Thanks, Jordana. A high-stakes meeting in California between two global superpowers. A look at what President Biden hopes to accomplish in talks with his Chinese counterpart. Next on Faith Nation.
A high-stakes summit in San Francisco. Today, President Biden met with Chinese President Xi for the first time in a year. The summit coming as tensions mount between the two powers from ongoing wars in the Middle East and Ukraine.
As always, there's no substitute to face-to-face discussions. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And we also have to manage it responsibly. The critical global challenges we face, from climate change to counter-narcotics to artificial intelligence, demand our joint efforts.
For his part, President Xi said, quote, "Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed." China's leader calling the U.S.-China relationship, quote, "the most important bilateral relationship in the world," adding that for the two countries, turning their back on each other is not an option and that conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides. The world leaders are expected to announce a crackdown on fentanyl and an expanded dialogue related to artificial intelligence. Also at issue, national security, including resuming military-to-military talks between the two world powers that ended after the Chinese spy balloon incident earlier this year. And, of course, the contentious issue of Taiwan.
Michael Hanlon is the Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution, and he joins us now. Michael, great to see you. So you heard President Biden tick off that long list, which includes global challenges from Ukraine to the war with Hamas and Israel to artificial intelligence. Michael, what do you see as the primary objective of this bilateral meeting?
Greetings. Well, I think simply getting on a path where we can have business-like disagreements on most issues and occasional cooperation on others, but above all, an avoidance of a spiral that takes us closer to conflict. So you could say that my expectations are modest. I'm not expecting a whole lot of big smiles at any kind of photo ops, and we already know there won't be a joint statement, but that's okay. My main concern here, and agreeing with President Xi that there's no more important bilateral relationship on earth, my main concern is that this not head towards actual physical violence. And there are ways that it could, because of all the tensions between the two sides, the kind of criticisms, the kind of names each side is using sometimes to describe the other, the various third parties like Taiwan that could be involved in some way that we don't control directly in contributing to a tense atmosphere. And so there's no doubt in my mind that there is a real chance of U.S.-China war, and that if it happened, it would be worse than most of us currently expect. So that has to be the paramount issue, avoiding that conflict.
Michael, how did relations between China and the United States get this bad? How did we get here?
I think in the broadest terms, over about a 40-year period, going back to the Kissinger-Nixon opening to China in the early 70s, we had a U.S. strategy that said, let's try to engage with China and hope that doing so brings them out of their shell, brings them into a more democratic and more pro-human rights and pro-religious freedom way of governance, and ultimately makes them have enough stake in the international economic order that they will accept that order rather than try to overturn it. And the problem is that they got strong and wealthy faster than they got more free, democratic, or pro-human rights. And they also, of course, continue to be more threatening in the Western Pacific, not only towards Taiwan, which they consider part of their mainland. So even if we wish they didn't feel that way, you can sort of see where they're coming from. But even towards the South China Sea, even towards the Senkaku Islands that Japan administers, ambitions that they've now expanded that make us all worry they could keep expanding. And so it's a combination of that economic dissatisfaction and, of course, the intellectual property theft and the unfair trade practices they've also used against our businesses. And also the last point, if I could, is the American workers' frustration that China has stolen jobs. And I think that's, of course, been something that both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump tapped into in 2016. In that election, it's something we still see on the minds of many Americans. So that's sort of the combination. So we've gone from bipartisan agreement to engage China, and now bipartisan agreement to be tough on China.
So we know a lot of their economic problems might be pushing the motivation to have this meeting. But I want to talk to you quickly, if we can, about a Politico piece that was published about the big quiet issue Biden and Xi are avoiding, reporting on how both countries are shoring up their nuclear arsenals. Michael, do you believe that we're in a new arms race?
There's an arms competition. An arms race might be a little strong because, China still doesn't even spend 2% of its gross domestic product on its military. The problem is its GDP has been growing so fast for 40 years that even keeping their percentage at 1.5% to 2% still makes for the world's second biggest military budget. And we're spending a little over 3%, which is much more. And our overall budget is nearing, $900 billion a year, but it's still a very modest fraction of our economy relative to the Cold War. On the other hand, on the specific point you make about nuclear weapons, it is true that China is no longer happy just having a couple hundred nuclear weapons, while the U.S. and Russia each have 5,000. And they're seeming to want to get into the same kind of 1,000-plus warhead ballpark to sort of counter us, to be in the same league with us. And that makes for a new dimension, especially now that we have to think about China and Russia potentially cooperating. They're not going to start a nuclear war out of the blue against us tomorrow. But if they are aligned and they together have more nuclear weapons than we do, that complicates our planning as well and may lead to a U.S. nuclear increase.
All right, Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution. Great to have you with us this evening and to talk about this. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you kindly.
Thanks, Michael. Well, they're called Confucius classrooms, American schools using a curriculum designed and funded by China's Communist Party to get students to believe that China is not a tyrannical country. These courses are taught in more than 500 public schools across the country. CBN's Dale Hurd reports on why some warn America's youth are being targeted with Chinese propaganda.
China is believed to have spent at least $17 million establishing Confucius classrooms in 143 school districts across the U.S., teaching school children Beijing's view of the world. Confucius classrooms are the public school version of Confucius Institutes, Chinese government-financed cultural programs that operate on college campuses, like this one at George Mason University. But while Congress has cracked down on Confucius Institutes by targeting their funding, experts told the House Committee on Education and the Workforce that Confucius classrooms are operating with little or no oversight.
This is an issue of national security. When you look at the indoctrination going on in our classrooms from several different perspectives, this is one of the most heinous.
What they want to do is influence our children into believing that, no, it's a good system and China is a normal country that is not tyrannical.
Confucius classrooms are presented to school districts as cultural exchange programs and the chance to learn the Mandarin language. But they're a project of the Chinese Communist government, and they teach young people the Chinese Communist Party view of politics and history.
So they will not talk about sensitive issues such as what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989. They will not talk about Taiwan, or when they talk about Taiwan, they will use the official version to say Taiwan is a province of China. It always and always will be.
And China is offering schools big money. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Fairfax County, Virginia, has reportedly disclosed that it's received at least $1 million in donations through the Confucius Classroom program. Nicole Neely, president of Parents Defending Education, also warns Confucius classrooms are operating near 20 military bases, influencing the children of American military personnel.
To your question about the military bases, we don't know what is happening, and that to me is the most frightening part. Who are these employees? What do they have access to? And what is going back and forth, both going into the minds of our children and then what data is flowing out of these?
That's a concern because Confucius classrooms also give the Chinese government access to data about the schools and the students. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And welcome back. Nearly down to the wire with just 2 days into the deadline, lawmakers appear ready to avoid a government shutdown. The Senate is working quickly to pass a new short-term House bipartisan measure approved late Tuesday. The stopgap bill is twofold, funding part of the government through mid-January and the remainder through early February. President Biden says he's ready to sign off on the measure once it clears the Senate. The proposal doesn't include additional aid for Israel or Ukraine.
Tonight, another stark warning from the top ranks in Washington. The U.S. is on alert for terrorists following the October 7th attacks on Israel.
The FBI and Homeland Security directors appeared in front of Congress today with a warning for Americans to stay vigilant while the situation in the Middle East escalates. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka joins us with more on the global threats. Matt.
Well, John and Jenna, those most responsible for protecting the country fear lone wolf attacks could happen here based on anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or just hate for America. The overarching message for Americans, be on the lookout.
In a year where the terrorism threat was already elevated, the ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans in the United States to a whole nother level.
A stark warning from FBI Director Christopher Wray, who also confirmed multiple investigations are underway nationwide into individuals who may have connections to Hamas.
Our most immediate concern is that individuals or small groups will draw twisted inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks here at home.
That concern quickly shifted the conversation to the southern border because nearly 200 people on the terror watch list have been encountered there.
200 is alarming to me. Does that give you concern?
Certainly, the numbers give us concern. I think it's important, though, in some ways, to realize that numbers alone don't even really tell the problem. And we've all seen how much damage just a small number of foreign terrorists could cause. I mean, sometimes people, as crazy as it sounds, tend to forget that it was 19 people who killed 3,000 people.
That was the next point I was going to make. It only took 19 to create 9/11.
And while all of this does sound indeed very scary, one point Wray did stress to the American people is that they should continue to live their lives, but there should also be a heightened awareness. Officials also stressed that there's no verified, credible threat to the country right now. Guys.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. Well, the White House becomes a winter wonderland. That's next on Faith Nation.
Jenna, are you ready?
Here we go.
Well, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas at the White House.
And the National Christmas Tree Association has spoken, picking a tree from North Carolina to grace the ballroom at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The 19-foot Fraser fir is making the trek up I-95 to its final location as the star of the White House Christmas decor. This year marks the 15th time a tree from North Carolina was chosen as the official White House Christmas tree, more than any other state.
Can't wait. Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.